Shortly after midnight on September 26, 1983, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov sat at his station inside a secret bunker near Moscow. He was monitoring the Soviet Union's newest early warning system, a network of satellites designed to detect American nuclear missiles. Then, without warning, the alarm sounded. The screen flashed a single word in bright red letters: launch. The system reported one intercontinental ballistic missile headed towards Soviet territory from the United States, then 4 more. Petrov had minutes to decide, minutes to report what could be the beginning of World War III, minutes before Soviet leaders might launch a devastating counterattack. He chose to wait. This is the true story of how one officer's decision prevented a nuclear catastrophe and why the world came closer to annihilation than most people ever knew. By September 1983, the world had lived under the shadow of nuclear weapons for nearly 4 decades. The United States and the Soviet Union each possessed thousands of warheads, enough to destroy civilization many times over. Both superpowers maintained what military strategists called mutual assured destruction. If one side launched a nuclear attack, the other would respond with overwhelming force. The result would be global catastrophe. But 1983 was especially dangerous. 3 weeks before Petrov's shift, Soviet fighters had shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007 after it strayed into Soviet airspace, killing all 269 people aboard, including an American congressman. President Ronald Reagan had condemned the incident as a massacre. Tensions between Washington and Moscow had reached levels not seen since the Cuban Missile Crisis. To protect against surprise attack, both sides invested heavily in early warning systems. The Soviet system, codenamed OKO, meaning eye, used satellites in highly elliptical orbits to watch American missile fields. These satellites detected the infrared heat signatures of rocket engines. If American missiles launched, OKO would theoretically provide precious minutes of warning. The system fed data to command centers like Serpukhov 15, a classified military facility about 80 kilometers south of Moscow. Officers there monitored the satellites around the clock. If they detected a launch, they would immediately notify Soviet military leadership. The entire process was designed for speed. From detection to decision, commanders would have perhaps 10 to 15 minutes. There was no time for lengthy verification, no time for doubt. In this hair-trigger environment, the system had to be perfect. Human judgment was considered a potential weakness, a source of hesitation when immediate action was required. But on this particular night, human judgment would prove to be humanity's salvation. Stanislav Yevgrafovich Petrov was born on September 7, 1939, near Vladivostok, Russia, just days after World War II began in Europe. His father was a fighter pilot who flew combat missions during the war. His mother worked as a nurse. Growing up in a military family, Petrov was expected to serve, but he possessed the temperament of an engineer, not a soldier. He was analytical, cautious, thoughtful. After completing his education at the Kiev Military Aviation Engineering Academy in 1972, Petrov joined the Soviet Air Defense Forces. Unlike many of his colleagues who received purely military training, Petrov had studied engineering and computer systems. In the early 1970s, he was assigned to work on the development of the OKO satellite early warning system. He understood the technology intimately, both its capabilities and its limitations. He knew the satellites used infrared sensors to detect missile launches. He knew the data processing algorithms. And he knew the system was new, complex, and not entirely reliable. By 1983, Petrov had risen to the rank of lieutenant colonel. On September 26th, he was serving as the duty officer at Serpukhov 15. His role was straightforward: monitor the satellite feeds, and if the system detected a missile launch, immediately report it up the chain of command. Petrov wasn't even supposed to be there that night. Another officer had called in sick, and Petrov took the shift. It was a routine substitution, the kind that happens in any workplace. But this would be anything but a routine night. The first few hours of Petrov's shift passed quietly. The bunker hummed with the sounds of computers and ventilation systems. Officers monitored their screens. Everything appeared normal. Then, shortly after midnight Moscow time, the alarm sounded. A siren blared throughout the bunker. Across the room, a large display panel suddenly lit up with bright red letters: Launch. The computer system declared with highest reliability that one intercontinental ballistic missile had been launched from United States territory, specifically from Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, and was headed toward the Soviet Union. The bunker erupted into controlled chaos. Officers rushed to their stations. Phones were lifted. Petrov felt the weight of every eye in the room upon him. As the duty officer, it was his responsibility to assess the situation and report to his superiors. The protocol was clear. If the system detected a launch, he was to immediately notify military command. They would then alert Soviet leadership, who would decide whether to launch a retaliatory strike. Petrov stared at the display. His training told him to trust the system. The computer reported highest reliability, but something felt wrong. A single missile made no sense. Petrov had been briefed countless times on American nuclear strategy. If the United States launched a first strike, it would be massive, hundreds of missiles designed to overwhelm Soviet defenses and destroy the ability to retaliate. Why would they launch just one? Before he could fully process this thought, the system updated. 4 more missiles detected. Now the screen showed 5 American ICBMs in flight, all headed towards Soviet territory. The tension in the bunker became almost unbearable. Personnel looked to Petrov for direction. Phones were ready. One call could set in motion events that would change history forever. Petrov's mind raced through possibilities. 5 missiles still seemed illogical for a first strike, but the computer insisted the launches were real. The detection system was sophisticated, designed by some of the best scientists and engineers in the Soviet Union. Yet Petrov knew the system intimately. He had worked on its development. He understood that the Oko satellites used highly elliptical Molniya orbits, which could create unusual viewing angles. He knew the infrared sensors sometimes struggled to distinguish between missile exhaust and other heat sources. And he knew the system was brand new. It had only recently become operational. There hadn't been time to work out all the problems. Petrov made a crucial observation. Soviet ground-based radar showed nothing. These radars were designed to track missiles after they rose above the horizon. If 5 American ICBMs were really in flight, the ground radars should have detected them within minutes. But the radar screens remained clear. Petrov had perhaps 10 minutes to make his decision. After that, if the missiles were real, it would be too late for the Soviet Union to respond effectively. He could feel his heart pounding. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the bunker's controlled temperature. The weight of responsibility was crushing. If he reported a false alarm, he would look incompetent. But if he failed to report a real attack, millions of his countrymen could die. In that moment, Petrov later recalled, he had a funny feeling in my gut. He began analyzing the situation systematically. The satellite system showed 5 missiles, but 5 missiles contradicted everything he knew about American nuclear doctrine. A genuine first strike would involve hundreds, perhaps thousands of warheads launched simultaneously to cripple Soviet command and control before retaliation could be ordered. The ground radar systems, which were older and more proven, detected nothing. This was significant. The satellites were new and experimental. The ground radars had been in operation for years. Petrov also considered the detection method itself. The OCO satellites identified missile launches by detecting the intense infrared radiation from rocket engines. But the satellites operated in highly elliptical orbits, and their viewing angle changed constantly throughout their orbital path. During certain phases, they looked down through Earth's atmosphere at low angles. Could the satellites be detecting something else? Sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds? The sun's position at that time of night created conditions where reflections were possible. Petrov made his choice. He would not report the alert as a genuine attack. He classified it as a false alarm. He picked up the phone not to warn of incoming missiles, but to inform his superiors that the system was malfunctioning. It was one of the most momentous decisions any individual has ever made, though Petrov later insisted he was simply doing his job. The minutes ticked by. Officers watched their screens. If the missiles were real, impact would occur soon. The bunker would learn the truth one way or another. Petrov's decision violated protocol. In the rigid Soviet military hierarchy, questioning the system was not encouraged. The computers represented the pinnacle of Soviet technology. To doubt them was to doubt the entire apparatus. But Petrov's background in engineering gave him a different perspective. He understood that all systems could fail. He knew that software could have bugs. He had civilian technical training that encouraged critical thinking rather than blind obedience to procedure. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 15. No missiles struck Soviet territory, no nuclear detonations, no reports of impacts from other detection systems. The alert was false. In the hours and days following the incident, Soviet engineers investigated what had gone wrong. Their findings were both revealing and disturbing. The false alarm was caused by a rare alignment of sunlight, clouds, and the satellite's orbital position. The OCO satellites used highly elliptical Molniya orbits, which took them from about 600 kilometers at their lowest point to nearly 40,000 kilometers at their highest point. During certain parts of their orbit, the satellites had to look down through Earth's atmosphere at oblique angles. On September 26, 1983, sunlight at a specific angle reflected off high-altitude clouds. To the satellite's infrared sensors, this reflection mimicked the heat signature of missile engine exhaust. The system's software, still in its early operational phase, lacked sophisticated filters to distinguish between genuine missile launches and such anomalous reflections. The satellite that generated the false alarm was Cosmos 1382. It had detected what appeared to be 5 sequential launches from American missile fields. But it was actually detecting the same cloud formation from slightly different angles as the satellite moved through its orbit. Ground-based radar systems never confirmed the launches because there was nothing to confirm. The radars, which had been in service longer and had more proven reliability, correctly showed no missiles in flight. But the OCO system was designed to provide earlier warning than ground radar. And in this case, it provided a warning of something that didn't exist. The incident exposed serious flaws in the early warning system. The software was rewritten to better filter out false signals. Engineers implemented additional verification protocols, including cross-referencing with ground-based radar before declaring high confidence in a launch detection. Soviet officials also realized how close they had come to catastrophe. If Petrov had followed protocol exactly, if he had reported the satellite data as a genuine attack without questioning it, Soviet leadership would have faced an agonizing decision under extreme time pressure. Would they have launched a counterattack based on satellite data alone? Military experts and historians debate this question. Some argue that Soviet leadership would have waited for ground radar confirmation. Others point out that in 1983, with tensions at an extreme level following the Korean airliner incident, and with Soviet leader Yuri Andropov reportedly paranoid about American intentions, the risk of hasty retaliation was very real. What is certain is that Petrov's decision removed one critical link from the chain of events that could have led to nuclear war. Rather than receiving a medal, Stanislav Petrov was reprimanded. Soviet officials criticized him for failing to properly document his actions during the crisis. The official explanation was that with a phone in one hand and an intercom in the other, managing the situation in real time, he hadn't filled out his logbook correctly. The real issue was more complex. Petrov's correct decision had exposed significant flaws in a system the Soviet military was proud of. To publicly reward him would mean officially acknowledging those flaws and potentially punishing those responsible for the system's failures. In the rigid Soviet bureaucracy, this created an impossible situation. The incident remained classified for years. Petrov was reassigned to a less sensitive position. The stress of that night, combined with the underwhelming response from his superiors, took a toll. Petrov suffered a nervous breakdown and took early retirement from the military in 1984. For more than a decade, virtually no one outside a small circle of Soviet military officials knew what had happened. Petrov's own family didn't know the details. When his wife asked what he had done during his career, he would simply say, "Nothing. I did nothing." The story finally became public in the 1990s after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when a retired Russian general mentioned the incident to journalists. As details emerged, the world began to understand how close it had come to nuclear catastrophe. Recognition came late in Petrov's life. In 2004, the Association of World Citizens honored him with a special award. In 2006, he traveled to the United Nations in New York to receive the World Citizen Award. He met American journalist Walter Cronkite and visited the Minuteman Missile National Historic Site, a former American missile base that his satellites had once watched for launches. In 2013, Petrov received the Dresden Peace Prize, which included €25,000. The award citation noted his outstanding personal contribution to the prevention of nuclear war. A 2014 documentary, The Man Who Saved the World, brought his story to a wider audience. Yet Petrov remained modest about his role. In interviews, he insisted he had simply been doing his job, that he was the right person at the right time. Stanislav Petrov died on May 19, 2017, at 77 from pneumonia. His death went largely unnoticed for several months. When news finally spread in September, tributes poured in from around the world. In 2018, on the 35th anniversary of the incident, Petrov was posthumously honored with the Future of Life Award at the United Nations. Former UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon said, "It is hard to imagine anything more devastating for humanity than all-out nuclear war, yet this might have occurred by accident on September 26, 1983, were it not for the wise decisions of Stanislav Petrov." His daughter Elena accepted the award on his behalf. Today, nuclear early warning systems are more sophisticated than those of 1983. Better sensors, more advanced algorithms, and multiple layers of verification reduce the risk of false alarms. But the fundamental tension remains. The systems must be fast enough to provide warning, yet accurate enough to avoid triggering catastrophe based on errors. The Petrov incident taught several crucial lessons. First, automated systems, no matter how advanced, can fail in unexpected ways. Second, the human element in nuclear command and control is both a weakness and a strength. Humans can make mistakes, but they can also apply judgment that saves the world from mechanical errors. Historians note that September 26, 1983, was not the only nuclear close call during the Cold War. But it may have been one of the most dangerous, occurring at a time of extreme tension when both sides were primed to expect the worst from each other. September 26th is now commemorated in some circles as Stanislav Petrov Day, a reminder to pause and appreciate the fragility of civilization and the power of individual decision-making in moments of crisis. Petrov's story challenges our assumptions about how history unfolds. We often imagine that great events are shaped by presidents and generals, by grand strategies and sweeping forces. But sometimes the course of human civilization rests on the shoulders of one person in a bunker, facing a decision under crushing pressure, with minutes to act. On that September night in 1983, one Soviet officer chose critical thinking over protocol, judgment over procedure, patience over panic. And because of that choice, the sun rose on September 27, 1983. The world continued. If you found this story compelling, please like this video and subscribe to Untold War Chronicles for more documented histories from the Cold War and beyond. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts on this remarkable moment in history. Thank you for watching.